I'd spent over 6 figures on this wedding. Every detail, the venue, the flowers, the 10-piece string quartet, had my name silently inked beneath it. And yet, as I stood beneath the glittering crystal chandelier of the Astoria Grand's ballroom, not one soul glanced my way, not even my granddaughter. Madeline looked breathtaking. I'll give her that. Her ivory gown sparkled with subtle beading that caught the golden light with every turn. She smiled, laughed, posed with her new husband Daniel in front of the wall of imported roses I paid for. Roses, she insisted, must be a pale blush, not too pink, not too white. The photographer followed her like a loyal dog, snapping each perfect angle. And me? I was placed at table 19, hidden behind one of the ballroom's grand marble columns. A literal obstruction between me and the rest of the celebration. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I circled the layout card 3 times with my fingertip before accepting it was intentional. My chair gave me a partial view of the cake table and the back of the band. Most guests couldn't even see me unless they stepped awkwardly to the side. And no one did. I sat in silence, hands folded in my lap, watching champagne flutes clink, cameras flash, and relatives pose for photos I was never asked to join. They didn't forget me. No, this was deliberate. The first speech was from Lydia, my daughter. Madeline has always been the heart of this family, she began, raising her glass. Her compassion, her vision, her sense of legacy. Today is a reflection of everything we value. I waited for my name, a mention, a nod, nothing. Not even a polite thank you to the woman who paid for every bite of steak and every bloom of hydrangea. I kept my face still as Lydia continued, speaking of Madeline's beauty, Daniel's promise and the strength of our family, a strength I had apparently never contributed to. Daniel's best man followed, then one of Madeline's friends. Speeches about love, future, and unity. I could have been a ghost in the room. Perhaps that was the intention. A waiter, bless him, approached. To refill my water. "Would you like champagne, ma'am?" he whispered, glancing uncertainly at the table's positioning. "No, thank you," I replied softly. "This view is exactly what I deserve." He hesitated, as if wanting to say, more. Then he nodded and left. I smiled politely when someone passed by, nodding toward me as though I were a stranger. I could have been anyone, a distant relative, or maybe an old neighbor who got invited out of pity. But I am Vivian Hargrave. For 34 years, I taught strategic negotiation at Charleston University. I've consulted for senators, governors, and corporate boards. I built our family's fortune alongside my late husband, a decorated judge who once told me, "Never underestimate the power of silence in a room full of noise." I had forgotten that lesson, until now. They wanted a show, and I'd given them one. My money, my resources, my name on every vendor invoice. But not my presence. Not really. They didn't want me. They wanted the image of me. The old woman with the checkbook. Quiet, grateful, and out of the way. As the music swelled and couples began to dance, I stood quietly from my seat. No one noticed. I walked out of the ballroom with dignity intact, clutching my small clutch purse like it held a weapon. Outside, the hallway was hushed, a soft contrast to the laughter echoing behind me. I paused by the gilded mirror in the foyer and looked at my reflection. Blue silk, pearl earrings, a subtle brooch once worn by my grandmother. I looked elegant, polished. So why did I feel like a relic shoved into a corner? I didn't cry. Instead, I stepped into the elevator, descended to the lobby, and summoned a car home. The doorman smiled warmly at me as he opened the glass door. "Leaving early, ma'am?" "Yes," I said. "I've seen everything I needed to see." When I arrived home, The house was quiet. My heels echoed against the hardwood as I walked to the study. The lights of the Charleston skyline shimmered through the tall windows like stars on water. I set my purse down on the desk, removed my phone, and made the first of 3 calls. The florist, the band, the photographer. Please confirm the final payments are scheduled to be processed at 8 p.m. tonight, I said. Yes, ma'am. Everything's scheduled. Good, I replied. Now cancel them. A pause. Cancel, ma'am? Yes, cancel. Per the clause we discussed. There was silence on the line as the realization sank in. I ended the calls with polite thank yous and set the phone down. No one puts Vivian Hargrave behind a column, not without consequences. And tomorrow morning, they would learn exactly what that meant. It began with voices drifting in through the kitchen window. A spring breeze had nudged the curtains aside, letting in the scent of magnolia blossoms, and, unintentionally, the sound of my daughter Lydia's voice floating in from the back garden. Well, we'll need to get rid of most of the old stuff, she was saying. The living room is straight, out of a period drama. It needs clean lines, light wood, something more current. I was carrying a silver tray with teacups, the same tray I used when hosting diplomats in this very house decades ago. I paused in the doorway, just out of sight, listening. She'll resist, Madeline said. My granddaughter's voice was light, amused. She clings to all that sentimental clutter like it holds her together. Lydia laughed. She barely notices changes anymore. Besides, we're doing her a favor. That sunroom is practically a museum. I placed the tray down on the marble counter a little too firmly. The porcelain clinked sharply against the silver, but the voices outside didn't pause. They hadn't heard. Or maybe they didn't care if they had. I had offered this gathering, tea, in the garden, as a chance to reconnect. A quiet afternoon between generations. What I overheard was not closeness, but calculation. I should have seen it sooner. That evening, over a candlelit dinner in the formal dining room, where once senators and scholars had toasted my husband's judicial milestones, Madeline raised her glass and spoke with rehearsed charm. Grandma, we've been thinking about your guest bedroom. Oh? I kept my expression neutral. A lifetime of negotiation taught me how. It needs a total overhaul, she said cheerfully. Something more functional. You know, for when the time comes and we need to take over the house. I blinked slowly. Take over? Lydia jumped, in, her smile tight. Well, you're nearly 80, Mom. We're just being practical. My soup suddenly tasted like dust. Madeline's fiancé, Daniel, shifted uncomfortably beside her. That's a long way off, I'm sure. Maybe, Madeline replied breezily, twirling her spoon. But estate stuff takes time. You know how these things go. I nodded once and excused myself to fetch dessert. In the study, I found myself standing before the old bookcase where we displayed our lives. My Harvard awards, framed articles, letters from presidents and prime ministers, a photograph with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Achievements that once filled rooms with silence. Now, they were just dust-covered relics to be cleared away like forgotten furniture. Lydia had called them visual clutter when she last visited. I picked up a silver frame containing a note from a former student-turned-ambassador. Your lectures changed how I negotiate peace, it read in bold ink. Where had that woman gone? The next night, I attempted to share a family story over dinner. Your grandfather used to say the Hargrave name opened doors, but it was character that kept them open. Does anyone want more wine? Lydia cut in, her voice sugary. Vivian, you've had such a long day. I smiled. I was just getting started. Madeline glanced at her watch. It's getting late, Grandma. Only Daniel met my eyes. Please continue, Mrs. Hargrave. I'd love to hear about the judge. A flicker of something I couldn't yet name passed over Madeline's face, something sharper than irritation. Possessiveness, perhaps. Later that night, sleep refused to come. I wandered downstairs, drawn by the need for tea, and perhaps something stronger. The light was on in the study. The door, slightly ajar. Lydia's voice carried clearly. Yes, she's definitely slowing down. Still sharp enough to sign things, though. 14 months left, Madeline said. We have to accelerate, everything before her 80th. The teacup in my hand trembled. My 80th birthday. The date the Hargrave Family Trust would officially transfer to its next guardian. They weren't just tidying the house, they were preparing to replace me. I didn't move. I stood in the shadows of my own home, listening to the women I raised speak of me as a problem to be managed, a box to be checked, a transition to be completed. And yet, strangely, I didn't feel fear. I felt something else stirring, something long dormant. They'd made one critical error. They'd mistaken my silence for senility, my patience for weakness, and my love for blind loyalty. They had forgotten who I was. I returned to my room and opened a drawer I hadn't touched in years. Inside was my husband's old silver pocket watch, worn smooth from courtrooms and quiet wisdom. He used to say it helped him sense when truth finally surfaced. I wrapped my fingers around it and felt something shift inside me. The woman they believed to be fading had just remembered how to fight. But this wouldn't be a tantrum. I wouldn't beg or shout or write angry letters. No, this would be something far more effective. Strategic, precise, unforgiving. The same qualities they forgot were part of the Hargrave name. They wanted control before my birthday. They were about to learn what it really meant to underestimate Vivian Hargrave. The next morning, I sat in my study with a pot of Earl Grey and a yellow legal pad. The pocket watch lay beside me, its silver surface catching the sunlight as it ticked quietly, insistently, like a metronome for the plan forming in my mind. For the first time in years, my thoughts didn't drift or circle. They locked in, one after the other. For decades, I'd taught strategy at Charleston University, international negotiation, crisis response, influence without confrontation. And yet here I was, letting my daughter manage my finances and my granddaughter seat me behind a column like an inconvenient potted plant. No more. I pulled out the old Rolodex buried in the desk drawer, flipping past worn cards until I found the one I needed. Graham Westwood, estate attorney, confidant, and former Harvard classmate of my husband. His handwriting hadn't changed. Elegant, slanted, self-assured. I dialed his office. Graham Westwood, came his crisp voice, still sharp despite the decades. Margaret, is that you? Vivian now, I corrected gently. I dropped Margaret years ago. But yes, it's me. I need to meet, today if possible. A pause. That serious? Very, he cleared his throat. Come by at noon. I'll clear my calendar. By 10 a.m., I had showered, dressed in a navy wool coat and slacks, and stepped into leather boots with a sensible heel. None of the soft pastels Lydia had begun favoring in my closet. I applied lipstick, not the mauve she recommended, but my signature red. The woman in the mirror wasn't gone. She'd just been hiding, waiting. Westwood and Chase was housed in an old stone building on the Battery, tucked between a law school and a museum. Graham greeted me himself. Still upright, he teased as he hugged me. And sharper than ever, I hope? Sharper than you, most likely. I smiled, sitting down in the sun-drenched conference room. We've got work to do. I outlined what I'd overheard. The estate plans, the manipulation, the push to gain control of the Hargrave Trust, before my 80th birthday. Graham's brow furrowed deeper with each detail. This could border on elder financial coercion, he said quietly. and it's becoming more common. I don't want to sue my family, Graham. I want to outmaneuver them. He nodded slowly. Then we revoke Lydia's power of attorney immediately. Restructure the trust to lock down asset control. I'll require a notarized cognitive assessment to preempt any claims of diminished capacity. I already scheduled an appointment, I replied. He blinked. Of course you did. We spent the next hour going over account authorizations, legal documentation, and the fine print of the trust. By the time I left, my signature was on 5 separate instruments of control, and Lydia's was on none of them. My next stop was a small security shop tucked behind an art gallery on King Street. A former student of mine, now a cybersecurity expert, had sent me a gift months ago. A sleek, discreet recording device, smaller than a lipstick tube. I'd tucked it away, thinking I'd never need it. I bought 2 more. From now on, I would document everything. I wasn't building a court case. I was preserving the truth. By late afternoon, I was seated at the Magnolia Tea Room, an old money haunt. I hadn't stepped foot in for over a year. I wasn't surprised when heads turned. Vivian Hargrave, came a familiar voice. Where have you been hiding yourself? Elaine Morton, retired corporate attorney and Charleston's most formidable hostess, swept across the room with arms open. Behind a veil of polite invisibility, I replied. But I've had enough. Tea parties where no one actually sees me. She studied me over her rimless glasses, then smiled like a fox. Well then, tell me everything. Over scones and lemon curd, I told Elaine what I hadn't dared share with anyone. Not just the betrayal, but the erosion. The subtle disappearance of who I once was beneath soft comments like, "Why don't you let us handle it, Mom?" And, "You're doing too much, Grandma." She listened without interruption, her eyes flashing sharper with every detail. "They're moving against your legacy," she said simply. "You need to move faster." "I'm prepared," I replied. "Then you'll need allies." We began making a list. Foundation luncheons, charity auctions, private museum tours, places where Charleston's elite whispered, and reputations were either restored or erased. If Lydia and Madeline had boxed me out of the social world, I would re-enter it deliberately. But this time, I'd plant seeds. 3 days later, I walked into a fundraising gala for the Carolina Literacy League. I wore a tailored black pantsuit, with silver embroidery at the collar. No pastels, no frills. I carried a small clutch, and my new recorder just in case. "Vivian, darling," said Charlotte Langford, president of the Symphony Board. "We haven't seen you in months." "I've been distracted," I replied. "Family has a way of making you feel indispensable and irrelevant at the same time." Laughter bubbled from the small circle around her. Genuine or polite, I didn't care. What mattered was that I had their attention. As the night progressed, I dropped phrases like breadcrumbs. "I'm helping fund my granddaughter's wedding." Lavish, of course. "They've made such interesting choices. I'm just along for the ride." Apparently, I'm not very photogenic these days. The last line landed like a pebble in still water. One woman tilted her head. "Surely you're joking." I wasn't. When I returned home, the hall lights glowed softly. Tess, my part-time housekeeper, had tidied the place and left a vase of white gardenias in the entryway. The scent greeted me like an old friend. In the study, I hung my coat, removed the recorder, and placed it beside the pocket watch. 2 simple tools, one for truth, the other for timing. I opened a fresh notebook and began cataloging everything. The overheard conversations, the appointment confirmations, the social reintroductions. Like an analyst preparing a report, I noted each variable, each vulnerability, each thread of power I had quietly taken back. They thought I was drifting toward irrelevance. They were wrong. I wasn't disappearing. I was preparing. The watch ticked beside me, steady and elegant, a reminder of who I had been, and who I still was. Nyan. They had forgotten what the Hargrave name stood for, but soon they would remember. The cake tasting was supposed to be a shared memory. Madeline had insisted we all go together, a chance to choose flavors, textures, and designs for the three-tiered showpiece of her Astoria grand wedding. "Grandma, you have to come," she'd said. "It wouldn't be the same without you." So I arrived on time. I wore my softest gray cashmere, the pearl earrings Madeline once claimed were iconic, and even brought along a clipping from a bridal magazine showcasing a honey lavender buttercream. I thought it might inspire her, but when I stepped inside La Petite Crème, the girl behind the counter blinked at me. "Are you with the Pearson tasting?" "Yes," I said. "Vivian Hargrave." Her eyes widened slightly. "Oh, they were just here. They left about 30 minutes ago." I blinked, smile faltering. "I think there's a mistake. Our appointment was for noon." The girl frowned and checked the logbook. "It was rescheduled this morning. 9:30. I assumed they told you." I checked my phone. No messages, no missed calls, no changes in the family group chat. Just silence. "They must have forgotten," I said softly, straightening the strap of my handbag. "They said I'd be here?" She hesitated. "They mentioned you might be tired today." I wasn't. But apparently, that was the version of me they were shopping around now. A tired old woman. Too fragile for a simple bakery appointment. The head pastry chef happened to pass through the lobby at that moment, his face lit up with recognition. "Mrs. Hargrave? My God, I haven't seen you since the governor's fundraiser at the Symphony Hall." I forced a smile. "Yes, that was years ago. Your late husband had such a sweet tooth. I always meant to send you that tart recipe he liked." "You were very kind to him," I said, and I meant it. The contrast between his respect and Madeline's dismissiveness twisted something in me. "I hope the cake tasting went well," I added. He nodded. "Your granddaughter has excellent taste, though I did think it was strange they said not to expect you." I thanked him, shook his hand, and left with no cake and no illusions. Back home, the silence of Riverstone Heights was heavy. I slipped off my coat and walked upstairs to my bedroom. I needed a moment, just a moment. But as I entered, I noticed something odd on the floor near the window seat. A small spiral-bound planner. Madeline's. It must have slipped from her tote bag during her last visit. I picked it up, intending to set it aside, but a folded page poking from the side caught my eye, marked with pink highlighter. The title at the top stopped me cold. How to Handle Grandma. Wedding Week. My hands tightened. It was a list. Keep her occupied with simple tasks. Limit speaking. Time during toasts. Avoid family stories. She repeats them. Seat with older, quiet guests. Place away from main photographer angles. Age spots difficult to retouch. Caroline to manage her medication schedule. I didn't sit down. I didn't cry. Instead, I stood in the middle of my room and read the list 3 more times. Each line burned. This wasn't just about forgetting to invite me to cake tasting. This was a campaign, a quiet, calculated erasure, wrapped in pastel smiles and, "Are you tired, Mom?" concern. They weren't waiting for me to decline. They were pushing me there, deliberately. So I made a decision. Let them think I was declining. Let them believe the act they'd written for me, that I was slow, sentimental, tired. I would wear the costume they'd assigned, smile sweetly, nod through dismissals, and quietly press record. Every whisper, every patronizing giggle, every plan made in rooms where they thought I wasn't listening. I retrieved the small black recorder from my drawer and turned it on. The red light blinked once. Begin documentation. Day 1. My voice was low, controlled. Subject: Madeline Pearson and Lydia Hargrave. Evidence of manipulation and financial coercion. Objective: strategic restoration of legacy and authority. I paused, then added: tactics, silence, observation, misdirection. My hand stopped trembling. My jaw unclenched. The pain had done its job. It had sharpened me. That evening, I attended a small charity dinner for the Charleston Historic Preservation Society, one of many upcoming events Elaine and I had chosen strategically. I wore a deep emerald green blazer, carried my vintage clutch, and greeted each person like I had never disappeared. By dessert, 3 guests had already said the same thing in various ways. "Vivian, you're everywhere again. I thought you were slowing down. You look amazing. What's your secret?" The secret was simple. They buried me before I was gone. Now I was writing the eulogy to their illusion. Quietly, strategically, deliciously. A month before the wedding, Madeline came to visit. She arrived with Daniel in tow, handsome, reserved, still fumbling for his place in the Hargrave hierarchy. They brought pastries from that overpriced cafe on Market Street, and a handwritten note I didn't need to read to know it was performative. "Grandma?" Madeline began sweetly, sitting across from me in the sunroom. "This wedding means the world to me, and the Astoria Grand is a once-in-a-lifetime venue. But it's also," she paused dramatically, "incredibly expensive." Daniel coughed quietly, clearly uncomfortable. Lydia arrived 10 minutes later, right on cue, pretending she hadn't coordinated the whole scene. "We wouldn't ask," she said, "if it weren't so meaningful to Madeline. The flowers, the band, the photographer, the honeymoon, it's all adding up." "Ah, there it was the pitch." I glanced at Daniel. His posture was stiff, gaze darting toward Madeline with something close to guilt. I had a feeling he didn't love this charade. "Of course," I said softly, folding my hands. "I'd be honored to support the celebration." Madeline's eyes sparkled. "Oh, Grandma, thank you. You're the most generous." "I'll cover everything," I continued. "The venue, the flowers, the band, and yes, the honeymoon as well." Lydia exhaled with relief. "That's amazing, Mom. But," I added, reaching for my notepad, "I'd like to handle all payments personally, through my financial team. No need to involve you with invoices or receipts." They hesitated, just for a breath. "Of course," Madeline said quickly. "Whatever's easiest for you." I smiled warmly. So easy to agree when you think the vault's wide open. 2 days later, I met with Graham Westwood again. We reviewed each vendor contract, line by line, in the quiet sanctity of his mahogany-paneled office. Every agreement was revised. Substantial deposits would be paid up front. But the final balances, the large sums that truly secured the services, would be set to process at exactly 8:00 p.m. on the night of the wedding. Each contract included a 24-hour cancellation clause, executed at my discretion. "Unusual terms," Graham noted as he watched me initial the revisions. "Perfectly legal, though," I reminded him. "Barely," he said, chuckling, "but very clever. You do realize if you pull the plug, the fallout will be exactly what it needs to be." He nodded, not approving so much as understanding. This wasn't about sabotage. It was about leverage. The next morning, I met with the wedding planner in my own parlor, something that surprised her. She was used to dealing with Lydia and Madeline directly. "Mrs. Hargrave," she said, flipping through her iPad, "Rebecca mentioned you're finalizing payments. Vivian, please. And yes, I'll be handling the financials personally." She gave a polite, neutral smile. "Of course, that makes things very easy." "I prefer clarity," I replied. "We'll keep all transactions centralized, and I'd like written confirmation that cancellation can be enacted without penalty." Up to 24 hours prior. Her eyebrows rose slightly. That's quite rare, but we can accommodate if the vendors agree. They will, I said, because they've already been paid generously for the deposit. The same afternoon, I made another set of calls. This time to Tess, my part-time housekeeper and, unbeknownst to Lydia, a quietly loyal ally. Would you mind packing a suitcase for me? I asked. Elegant but discreet. Something suitable for Tuscany. She didn't ask questions. The second call was to a luxury travel concierge I'd worked with years ago. I made 2 full honeymoon reservations at the exact same hotels Madeline had chosen, one under her name and Daniel's, and the other under mine. Mine would begin 3 days earlier, in the master suite. Theirs, in the smaller villa next door, if they made it that far. Please make sure no upgrades are extended to the Pearsons, I added, and no early arrivals accommodated. Discreet handling? The concierge asked. Discreet, I confirmed, but firm. That evening, I sat in my study and reviewed the full operation. The notebook I'd begun weeks ago was now thick with notes, conversations, overheard remarks, even timestamps of eye rolls and snide comments recorded from dinner gatherings. The small recorder had done its job beautifully. I played back one particular clip. Madeline's voice. She won't even remember where she's seated. We'll just say it's near the family table. Lydia. We can't risk her wandering. During photos, just keep her in the background. Then laughter. My laughter had been silent, but now I allowed myself a smile. The background was where they'd left me. It's also where I'd been rebuilding my fortress. Daniel came to visit. A few days later, alone. He asked for a brief chat. I poured him coffee and gestured toward the antique wingback opposite mine. I hope you're comfortable with everything, he said awkwardly. Rebecca, sometimes she gets wrapped up in the details. I've noticed, I replied. You're marrying into a family that believes performance is everything. His jaw tightened. I just want you to know, he added. I think you've been incredibly generous. I didn't expect that. You're not the only one surprised by my decisions, I said, swirling my spoon. But I've learned that timing is everything, especially when people begin underestimating you. He frowned slightly but said nothing. I didn't press further. He wasn't my target. He was collateral. Lydia called the next morning. Rebecca was wondering if you'd like to sit closer to the front at the ceremony. I raised an eyebrow, even though she couldn't see it. Oh? She's rethinking the layout. Something about the light near the columns not being ideal for photos. How thoughtful of her, I said, without inflection. We're just trying to make sure everyone feels included. How considerate, she exhaled. Mom, are you angry? No, I said. I'm just watching, carefully. That night. I finalized the last round of instructions with Graham. If anything happened to me before the wedding, all final payments would cancel automatically. If I failed to authorize the release by 7:59 p.m. on the wedding day, the cancellations would proceed. There was no way for Lydia or Madeline to override them. I tucked the silver pocket watch into my purse. The brooch, the family heirloom Madeline assumed she'd wear, remained locked away in a velvet box, out of sight, but not out of mind. Not yet. Let them believe the wedding was going exactly as planned. Let them enjoy the taste of control. They would soon learn that my final gift wasn't just financial. It was a lesson, wrapped in elegance, sealed in strategy, delivered with absolute precision. And I would be watching, tick by tick, as it unfolded. The Astoria Grand looked like a jewelry box come to life. Every inch glittered. Chandeliers throwing gold across silk-covered tables, petals floating in, champagne fountains, strings of pearls draped along crystal centerpieces. It was breathtaking, and I had paid for every detail. I arrived precisely at 5:30 p.m., just before the ceremony. Tess had ensured my dress was steamed and ready, a navy, silk ensemble with structured shoulders and pearl button cuffs. Sophisticated, unmistakably dignified. My brooch remained at home, tucked in its velvet box, unoffered. I wore instead the silver pocket watch on my wrist, a subtle but deliberate choice. As I entered the ballroom foyer, the planner greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach. Her eyes, "Mrs. Hargrave, welcome. You look radiant this evening." "Thank you," I replied. "And I trust everything is proceeding according to Rebecca's vision?" "Perfectly. Just perfect." She didn't mention my seating. Neither did I. Inside, guests were taking their places. Waitstaff floated like butterflies in black and white, refilling flutes of Prosecco, adjusting name cards. I walked through the chaos with unhurried steps, making my way to table 19 behind a column, just as I expected. It was tucked along the far left corner of the ballroom, behind one of the massive, ornately carved marble supports that held up the domed ceiling. From this vantage point, I could see half the dance floor. Most of the head table was blocked. I'd be absent from nearly every official photo angle. A waiter approached hesitantly. "Would you prefer to be moved, ma'am?" "No," I said, gently, smoothing my skirt. "This is exactly where my granddaughter wanted me." He lingered, uncertain. I gave him a soft smile to let him off the hook. The ceremony began 15 minutes later. Madeline descended the staircase like she was entering a Broadway finale. Dress glittering, smile practiced, chin tilted at the perfect angle for the camera. Gasps and sighs followed her down the aisle, but I heard none of it. I only watched. Daniel stood tall, hands trembling just slightly. I wondered if he felt it too, that the performance had begun to wear thin. I sat through the vows without emotion, applauding politely with the others. I did not cry. That part of me had dried up in the bakery weeks ago. At the reception, the music swelled into a soft jazz arrangement as guests filtered into the ballroom. I took my seat. The same column blocked my view of the stage, where Lydia and Madeline made speeches about love, tradition, and the strength of women who came before us. They didn't mention my name. I pressed record inside my clutch. Lydia raised her glass. "And to the woman who made all this possible, Rebecca, your vision, your love, your hard work. I am in awe of you." Rebecca dabbed her eyes. A camera flashed. The crowd clapped. I sipped my water and watched my legacy be credited to someone else. A polite guest at my table leaned toward me. "You must be so proud," I smiled. I've never been prouder. It wasn't a lie, but the pride I felt was no longer in them. It was in myself. At 7:30 p.m., Daniel found me. "Mrs. Hargrave," he said softly. "May I sit with you?" "Of course." He took the empty chair beside me, looking out over the crowd. "I didn't know they seated you back here," he muttered, brows furrowed. "Neither did I. Until I arrived. I thought you'd be at the head table." "I did too," I said, meeting his eyes. He flushed. "I'm sorry. I wish I'd known." "You're not the one I expected to protect me, Daniel." That landed. He nodded, ashamed. Rebecca said, "It was for your comfort. Less noise, less chaos." "How thoughtful of her," I replied. He was silent for a moment. "I want you to know. Whatever happens tonight, I see you. I mean that." I smiled. "That might be more than your bride can say." Before he could respond, Rebecca appeared. Her white dress trailed behind her like a cloud, and her smile was tight. "Jackson, they're calling us for the first dance. Just one moment. Now, please." She looked at me, eyes narrowing. "Are you enjoying yourself back here, Grandma?" "Immensely," I said. "The view is exactly what I deserve." She blinked, clearly unsure if it was sarcasm or sincerity. "Good," she said quickly. We didn't want you overwhelmed." "No," I replied. "Wouldn't want the photographers to work too hard." She turned and left without another word. Daniel gave me a lingering look, then followed her onto the dance floor. The speeches continued. Not once was I thanked. Not once was I acknowledged for financing the entire affair. I sat, listened, and documented. The silver watch on my wrist ticked toward 8:00 p.m. with perfect rhythm. At 7:57, I stood and gathered my things. No one noticed. Not Lydia, not Madeline. Not even the planner, who was busy reviewing a clipboard near the floral arch. I walked slowly toward the ballroom entrance, pausing briefly at the threshold to look back. Candles flickered. Laughter echoed. Champagne bubbled in flutes I had paid for. I watched my daughter bask in attention, my granddaughter spin in chiffon, my name unspoken beneath a ceiling of chandeliers I had commissioned. It was their moment. But it had been built on my foundation, and I had just removed one of its pillars. In the marble lobby, my car was already waiting. Tess had confirmed the timing with the driver earlier that day. "Airport, please," I said as he opened the door. "International departures." Once inside, I pulled out my phone, dialed the bank's after-hours line, and gave the agent my verification code. "This is Vivian Hargrave. Please cancel all scheduled payments associated with the Pearson wedding per previously arranged instructions." "Yes, ma'am." Cancellations confirmed. I ended the call and placed the phone gently in my lap. No anger, no shaking hands, just peace. Behind me, the Astoria Grand would continue to sparkle, for now. But within the hour, vendor after vendor would be notified. Transaction declined. Payment canceled by account holder. The photographer. The florist. The band. The honeymoon. Travel agency. Each contract would unravel like an overstretched ribbon, and all of it, precisely as I had designed. 3 days after the wedding, I stood on the terrace of the Villa Belladonna, high above the Arno River. Below, the rooftops of Florence basked in warm sunlight, a mosaic of terracotta tiles and ancient stone chimneys. The breeze smelled faintly of lavender and espresso. I was not supposed to be there, at least not according to Madeline. But then again, Madeline hadn't known about the duplicate honeymoon reservations I made in my own name. My suite at the villa was the finest, 3 floors above the one reserved for the newlyweds. Mine came with private vineyard tours, spa access, and a personal chef. Theirs would come with confusion, downgraded amenities, and no early check-in, assuming they even made it that far. The fallout from the wedding had begun the moment I stepped into the car, and the payment cancellations rippled through Charleston, like a quiet detonation. While I sipped Prosecco over gnocchi al tartufo in Florence, Madeline and Daniel were still at the Astoria Grand, trying to check out without a functioning credit card. The hotel manager, no doubt pale with discomfort, would have delivered the news with polished regret. "I'm afraid your grandmother canceled the final balance last night, Mrs. Pearson. The deposit only covered partial costs." Madeline, I imagined, would have sputtered. There must be a mistake. Daniel, bless him, likely went still and silent, already suspecting there wasn't. Within hours, the vendors would have begun calling. The florist, the bandleader, the cake designer, the violinist quartet, each delivering the same message. Funds revoked. Balance outstanding. Immediate payment required. By then, Caroline, Lydia, would have driven to my house in a frenzy, expecting to find me frail, confused, perhaps lost in some fugue of forgetfulness. Instead, she would have found an empty house, immaculately clean, wardrobe cleared, safe locked, tea cabinet alphabetized. Tess had handled everything flawlessly. My neighbors, when questioned, would have mentioned seeing me leave the night before in a black car, luggage in hand, looking rather regal. By the time Caroline finally reached Graham Westwood, he would have confirmed what I instructed him to say. Yes, Mrs. Hargrave is traveling, voluntarily, of sound mind. She declined to inform you in advance. I want to speak to her, Caroline would have demanded. She has requested no contact until she returns, Graham would have replied. And I must advise you that her financial and legal affairs are now entirely private. I imagined her silence. Her realization, her dawning understanding that the woman she thought was fading had just vanished on her own terms. On the third morning of my Tuscan escape, a message arrived at the front desk, a handwritten envelope bearing the villa's seal. Inside, a typed report from Elaine Morton. As promised, she had remained in Charleston, my eyes and ears. Her note began simply, Phase 2 is underway. Elaine detailed the local fallout with surgical precision. The Astoria Grand had released a vague statement about unexpected financial changes. Caroline was avoiding social events. Madeline had gone radio silent. The florist, Tess's cousin, had become vocal about elder financial abuse at her shop. My absence had become the whispered mystery at Charleston luncheons. Everyone wanted to know, why had Vivian Hargrave vanished after funding the wedding of the year? And more importantly, why had she canceled every payment? I gave them the answer. On my 4th day in Florence, I mailed 3 letters, each sealed with the Hargrave family crest in burgundy wax. One to Caroline and Madeline, one to Elaine, one to Jackson Pearson, Daniel's father, a federal judge and a friend of my late husband. Inside each envelope was a 4-page letter detailing the recorded conversations, the list titled How to Handle Grandma, the intentional efforts to push me toward perceived senility, and the plan to gain early control of the Hargrave Trust. There were no accusations, only documentation. I did not rant. I did not rage. Instead, I outlined the events, my observations, and my decisions. I closed each letter with the same paragraph. For 30 years, I taught my students that the most fatal mistake in any negotiation is underestimating your counterpart. You made that mistake. This is your education. Use it wisely. When I returned to Charleston 3 weeks later, the house felt exactly how I left it. Mine. Photographs were back on the mantel. My husband's chair faced the fireplace again. The sunroom smelled of lemon oil and old books. Tess had arranged for the front garden to bloom with blue hydrangeas, my favorite, not Caroline's white roses. In the entryway, waiting for me on a silver tray, were envelopes. Madeline, Daniel, Jackson, Graham, Elaine, all handwritten. I poured a cup of tea before opening them. Daniel's letter was short but heartfelt. I had no idea. I thought we were asking for help, not exploiting you. I'm sorry. I truly am. Jackson's was longer. You remind me of your husband. Sharp as a blade. If Madeline truly wants to repair the relationship, she'll need to earn it. I hope she will. Elaine simply read, The city is talking, and they are on your side. Madeline's took 3 tries to finish. I don't have an excuse. What I did, what we did, was selfish and ungrateful. You gave me everything, and I tried to control you like a purse string. I see that now. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to learn. If there's any path back into your life, I'm willing to walk it. I waited 6 weeks. Then I sent a single invitation. Internship application, the Hargrave Foundation for Women's Leadership. She applied, under her real name. No shortcuts. She began work 3 days later, entry level, supervised by Tess, no special treatment. Her first day, I observed from the 2nd floor balcony as she restocked the resource library and organized old files. She worked hard. She didn't complain. She never once mentioned the wedding. By month 3, she was leading our outreach efforts to schools. By month 5, she drafted a grant proposal that won us $25,000 in new funding. By month 6, she walked into my office, closed the door, and said, "Thank you for letting me try." I looked up from my desk, where the silver pocket watch still ticked in a glass case beside my late husband's photo. "You've earned the chance," I said. "But trust? That will take time." "I know." And for the first time, I believed. She did. Today, as I write this, the sun is setting over Charleston Harbor. In my office, a framed photograph hangs just above the fireplace. Not from the wedding, but from the Hargrave Foundation Gala held 2 months ago. In it, 3 generations stand together. Myself, Madeline, in a navy dress, no longer pretending, and Emily, my great-grandniece, age 11, who just entered our mentorship program. We are not perfect, but we are honest now. Madeline speaks of legacy with humility. Caroline sends holiday cards, no longer requests. Daniel and Jackson remain polite, respectful, and quiet. The Hargrave name was never about wealth. It was about strength, about clarity, about earned respect. I had once nearly let that be stripped away by the people I loved most, until I remembered that even behind a marble column, I still had a voice. And when used wisely, a single voice can still command a room. Thank you for listening to my story. If it made you feel something, share your story in the comments. Your voice matters too. And don't forget, never underestimate the woman behind the column.